Welcome back to Open Window Politics. Today we're going to be going through the 2026 U.S. Senate election predictions. We'll start out with, I've already characterized all the safe states. With that, Democrats start at 43 to Republicans 45. Republicans only need to win 5 of these seats to hold the Senate, at least for the rest of Trump's term, with J.D. Vance, the vice president, being the tie-breaking vote. So Democrats are not put in a great position at the get-go, but we'll start out with the likely states for the Democrats at a likely rating. At the moment, there really is just the one, the state of Minnesota, but that is going to be one more seat for the Democrats, 44 to 45. And there are going to be a couple in the likely Republican category. So there's some interesting ones here. We have the usual 4 states, with starting out with Iowa. Iowa has in the past been regarded as more of a swing state. It has fairly consistently voted Republican in recent elections, and it is slightly more competitive than a state such as Montana or one of the safe red states. So Iowa is going to be an interesting one to watch. I think at the end of the day, will still be a Republican state and a Republican hold in the Senate, but nonetheless, it's going into the likely rating. And then Florida, I think, is probably the next most likely to also end up in the likely category. Florida has fairly consistently voted Republican in recent elections. Definitely seen a shift towards favoring Republicans. Now is definitely a more favorable environment for Democrats on the national landscape. So I do think it would possibly have the chance to narrow up to maybe a lean. At the moment, though, I think in Florida at least that it would remain in the likely column. And I've gone back and forth on Texas. I think Texas is narrowing up, but I think it will still remain in the Republican Party's control. This is going to be, there's going to be an interesting, well, there is an interesting Senate Democratic primary as well as Republican primary going on to determine who will be the general election candidates for this state. So Texas, definitely a state to keep your eye on. So that brings Republicans to 48 seats, to Democrats 44. There are going to be a few more in the lean red category. Start out with Alaska. Alaska would normally be in the likely red, if not safe red state of characterization. But there's a former congresswoman from the state, Mary Peltola, who really shook up the game in the state of Alaska and announced her candidacy for the Senate seat. And I think she has a better shot at winning than any other Democrat that Democrats could have put forward. So I think that she will narrow it up. Ultimately, I think that Alaska is still a fairly conservative state. I think it's definitely possible that Peltola could win on the Senate level. She did win the House district, and because Alaska doesn't have too much of a population, the whole state is also, it's just an at-large House district. So she has won the state in the House, and I think it's possible she could do it in the Senate. Now is also shaping up to be a more favorable environment for Democrats on the national level, so I'm going to keep it in the lean column, definitely a narrow up from what it would usually be in the likely, if not safe column. So that is going to be that, and then there's actually going to be one more in the lean, 2 more in the lean category. So Nebraska, I narrow this race up. Dan Osborne is an independent. He actually ran in 2024. He outperformed Harris in the state of Nebraska fairly considerably, and Dan Osborne is now running for the other Senate seat in the state of Nebraska. So it'll be an interesting one to watch. He's an independent. Democrats, last I heard, aren't putting forward a candidate, so it will sort of be a situation where Democrats will vote for the independent, in this case Dan Osborne, and Democrats are hoping that it will result in an independent victory. I think that Dan Osborne definitely stands more of a chance in the state of winning the Senate race than a Democrat would. So I think it is in Democrats' favor to not nominate a candidate, to hope that Dan Osborne emerges victorious against the Republican challenger. So that is going to be 50 seats for the Republicans. So even if the Democrats are able to win every single one of the states remaining, it would still be a Republican-held Senate, at least until the end of Trump's term, whenever a new vice president was elected. But I do think that the environment for the Republicans in the Senate is going to get even better with the state of Ohio. Ohio, this is a Republican seat. This is really only in the lean category instead of likely. Well, a couple of reasons. There is, like I mentioned a couple times, more favorable environment for Democrats on the national level, as well as in this case, the Democrats have a great candidate, Sherrod Brown. He actually lost his election for the other Senate seat that he previously held in Ohio in 2024 and is now hoping to win the other Senate seat in Ohio as a Democrat. And ultimately, I think it will still end up in the Republican Party's column. But I do think Sherrod Brown is a good pick, and he would narrow it up from likely to lean. So that's going to be the state of Ohio, 51 seats. Republicans have a guaranteed majority and could afford to lose a vote in a contentious vote. And then I'm going to go with the lean blue states. There's really only one of those, that being the state of New Hampshire. So New Hampshire brings Democrats to 45, to Republicans 51. And then I'll start out, these are going to be the swing states that they won't determine the control of the Senate because Republicans already have that, but they will control the margin. So I'm going to start out with Georgia. This is Jon Ossoff's seat. I think that he has got a really good chance of winning re-election. He is the incumbent Democrat and it'll be interesting to see what happens, but I think if the election were to be held today, that it would result in a Democratic victory. Georgia has had some good elections for Democrats in the off-year elections, and it'll be interesting to see what happens during the midterms. It will give us an idea of which way the state is leaning for the presidential election in 2028. And at the moment, I think it would result in a Democratic victory, so that's going to be a seat held for the Democrats. And then this is going to be one of the first flips, if not the first flip. This is the state of North Carolina. Roy Cooper, former popular incumbent Democrat for the governorship, is running for the Senate seat here. He was a great pick by Democrats and probably is one of the best candidates Democrats could have put forward. And I think that he has the very real likelihood to flip this seat from Republican to Democrat, being a pickup for Democrats. And then that leaves us really with these two remaining states, Michigan and Maine. I'll start with Michigan. Michigan I've gone back and forth on, but I do think Michigan would end up in the Democratic Party's column. We've seen some more and more off-year election results shape up to be very good for Democrats. So I think that in a swing state like Michigan, that it will result in a Democratic victory. We've seen even with the election in Texas a little while ago, that was a fairly safe Republican district that Trump won, but ultimately the Democrat won it if I remember correctly, it was the state Senate election. So if I think Democrats are going to overperform, and 2026 I would predict, would result in them holding a seat in the state of Michigan. And then I do think Democrats are going to get their second flip, that being the state of Maine. Maine is an interesting case. This is Susan Collins' seat. She has definitely tried to portray herself as more of a moderate. She's voted for some key Democratic voting bills and has definitely positioned herself as more of a moderate. We just see fewer and fewer states with one senator from one party and another senator from the other party. Just nature of polarization and the other senator from Maine, it's actually an independent. He's one of those purple ones in the top right corner, but he caucuses with the Democrats, which is why he's included in the Democratic Party's column. And then Maine, usually in the election presidential predictions, is usually in the lean blue rating. So it would take a lot for Susan Collins to win another election. She has defied the odds before and has emerged victorious against some fairly strong Democratic contenders. So I definitely think there's a real possibility she could win again. But if I had to call it, I think I would probably call the state of Maine for the Democrats, bringing them to 49 to Republicans 51. So don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks. Bye.